Sir, you need to get up. This is my seat. The young woman's voice cut through the airplane cabin like a knife, drawing stares from nearby passengers. The elderly man in the worn military jacket looked up with tired eyes, his weathered hands gripping his boarding pass. "I'm sorry, miss, but I believe there's been some confusion. My ticket shows seat 12A. Well, your ticket is wrong. I paid for premium economy, and I'm not sitting in the back with the crying babies." She tapped her designer heel impatiently, her voice rising. "Move, now!" The old man slowly began to gather his small carry-on bag, his movements careful and deliberate. Fellow passengers watched in uncomfortable silence as this scene unfolded at 30,000 feet. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where we uncover the moments that remind us of the kindness and respect that still exist in our world, even when they seem hardest to find. Today's story will show you how one act of cruelty led to an unexpected revelation that changed everyone aboard Flight 447. Let's uncover what really happened on that Tuesday afternoon flight from Chicago to Phoenix, and how a pilot's announcement brought an entire airplane to tears. Robert Martinez had been flying for 43 years. He'd seen every type of passenger imaginable, dealt with countless emergencies, and navigated through storms that would terrify most people. But he'd never experienced anything quite like what was about to unfold in his cabin. Meanwhile, in seat 12A, Harold Thompson sat quietly, trying to make sense of the situation. At 78 years old, Harold had learned to pick his battles carefully. The young woman standing over him was clearly upset, and he didn't want to cause a scene. He'd been through worse things than giving up an airplane seat. Harold was traveling alone, returning from a ceremony he'd attended in Chicago. In his jacket pocket was a folded letter and a small medal case that he kept close to his heart. He'd made this trip every year for the past decade, and each time it got a little harder. But some promises he believed were meant to be kept no matter what. "Excuse me, what seems to be the problem here?" The flight attendant, Sarah Chen, approached with a professional smile, though her eyes showed concern. She'd worked for the airline for 15 years and had developed a sixth sense for situations that could escalate quickly. The young woman, Jessica, turned her frustration towards Sarah. "This old man is in my seat. I paid extra for this spot, and I expect to get what I paid for. He needs to move to the back where he belongs." Sarah checked both boarding passes carefully. Her expression grew puzzled as she reviewed the seat assignments on her tablet. "I'm seeing some kind of system error here. Mr. Thompson, you were originally assigned to 12A, but somehow the system also issued this seat to another passenger. Let me see what I can do to resolve this." "Don't bother resolving anything," Jessica snapped. "Just move him. I was here first, and I'm not budging." Harold began to stand slowly, his arthritis making the movement painful. "It's all right, miss. I don't need much space. I can sit anywhere." "No, Mr. Thompson, please stay seated while I figure this out," Sarah said gently, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. She could see something in his eyes, a depth of experience that commanded respect. There was more to this man than met the eye, but Jessica wasn't having it. "I have an important business meeting in Phoenix. I need to work during this flight, and I specifically chose this seat for the extra legroom and power outlets. He's just an old man. What could he possibly need all this space for?" The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A businessman lowered his laptop screen. A mother pulled her young daughter closer. Everyone could feel the tension building. Harold's face remained calm, but those who looked closely could see a flicker of something deeper. Not anger exactly, but a quiet sadness that comes from being dismissed and devalued. He'd seen enough of life to know that some people judged others by their appearance, but it still stung. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration," Sarah said, trying to maintain her professional composure while her patience wore thin. "But we need to treat all our passengers with respect. Let me contact the cockpit and see if we can find another solution." That's when Captain Martinez's voice came over the intercom for what should have been a routine announcement about their cruising altitude and expected arrival time. Instead, his words would change everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I apologize for the interruption, but I've been made aware of a situation in the cabin that requires my immediate attention. We'll be maintaining our current altitude while I address this matter personally." The seatbelt sign chimed on, and murmurs rippled through the cabin. It was unusual for a captain to leave the cockpit during flight for anything other than an emergency. Co-pilot Jennifer Walsh took the controls as Captain Martinez made his way down the aisle. He was a tall man with graying temples and the confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades making split-second decisions under pressure. His eyes scanned the cabin until they landed on the commotion around seat 12A. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked Sarah quietly. She quickly explained the seating conflict and Jessica's demands. Captain Martinez listened without interruption, his gaze shifting between Jessica and Harold. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Mr. Thompson, may I see your boarding pass?" Harold handed it over with a slight tremor in his weathered hands. The captain examined it carefully, then looked more closely at Harold's jacket. His eyes stopped on something that made him freeze. Pinned to Harold's lapel was a small ribbon, faded with age but unmistakable to anyone who knew military decorations. It was the Purple Heart, awarded to those wounded in combat service to their country. Captain Martinez's entire demeanor changed. He straightened to attention, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that commanded the attention of everyone within earshot. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" His voice projected naturally through the cabin, without the intercom. "I'd like you all to meet Mr. Harold Thompson." Jessica rolled her eyes. "Great. Now we're doing introductions. Can we just get this resolved so I can sit down?" But Captain Martinez continued, his voice growing stronger. "Mr. Thompson is returning from Chicago, where yesterday he attended a memorial service for his unit from the Korean War. He's made this trip every year for the past 10 years, ever since he was the last surviving member of his squad." The cabin grew quiet. Even Jessica's impatient tapping stopped. "Mr. Thompson was wounded twice in the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge in 1951. He spent 4 months in a military hospital and carries shrapnel in his left leg to this day, which is why standing for long periods is difficult for him." Harold's eyes welled up, but he remained silent. He hadn't expected his story to be shared with a plane full of strangers. Captain Martinez wasn't finished. "But that's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you this because Mr. Thompson saved my father's life in Korea. Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez was pinned down by enemy fire when Private Thompson crawled through gunfire to pull him to safety. My father lived to come home, marry my mother, and raise 3 children because of this man's courage." The cabin was now completely silent, except for the steady hum of the engines. Jessica's face had gone pale. "I learned my father's story when I was 12 years old. He told me that if I ever had the chance to repay Harold Thompson or his family, I should consider it an honor. I never thought I'd get that chance." Captain Martinez turned to face Jessica directly. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to move to another seat. Mr. Thompson will be staying exactly where he is, and he'll be our guest in first class for the remainder of this flight." "But I paid for that seat," Jessica protested weakly, her earlier anger replaced by embarrassment. "The airline will refund your upgrade fee and provide you with a voucher for future travel," the captain replied firmly. "But Mr. Thompson has earned his place on this aircraft and in that seat through service to our country and through saving the life of a fellow soldier. He will be treated with the respect he deserves." Without another word, Captain Martinez reached into his jacket and pulled out his captain's wings pin. He stepped forward and gently pinned it to Harold's jacket, right next to the Purple Heart. "Thank you for your service, sir, and thank you for bringing my father home." Harold's composed facade finally cracked. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks as he gripped the captain's hand. Your father was a good man. He talked about his family constantly. I'm honored to meet his son." The entire cabin erupted in applause. Passengers stood and clapped, many with tears in their own eyes. The businessman closed his laptop completely and joined the ovation. The mother explained to her daughter why everyone was clapping. Even the flight attendants were wiping away tears. Jessica quietly moved to another seat without further complaint, her designer attitude replaced by shame and a newfound understanding of the man she'd dismissed so quickly. Sarah personally escorted Harold to a first-class seat, making sure he was comfortable and had everything he needed. Other passengers stopped by throughout the flight to shake his hand and thank him for his service. The businessman bought him a drink. The mother's daughter drew him a picture of an airplane with the words "Thank you" in crayon. Captain Martinez returned to the cockpit, but not before spending a few more minutes with Harold, sharing stories about his father and learning more about the man who'd given him the gift of family. As Flight 447 began its descent into Phoenix, Harold looked out the window at the desert landscape below. He thought about his fallen comrades, about the young soldier he'd saved all those years ago, and about the unexpected kindness he'd received from strangers 30,000 feet above the ground. When they landed, Harold was the last passenger to deplane. Not because he was slow, but because so many people wanted to thank him personally. Airport personnel had been notified about the special passenger, and Harold was greeted with a small honor guard of veterans who'd heard his story through the airline's communication network. Jessica watched from a distance as Harold was honored by people who understood the weight of his sacrifice. She approached him hesitantly as the crowd thinned. "Mr. Thompson, I owe you an apology. I was rude and disrespectful, and I'm ashamed of how I treated you. Thank you for your service, and I'm sorry for being so blind to who you really are." Harold looked at her with kind eyes, the same eyes that had seen too much war, but had never lost their capacity for forgiveness. "We all have bad days, young lady. What matters is what we do next." He shook her hand, and Jessica walked away, changed by the encounter, carrying with her a lesson about judging others and the hidden stories that every person carries. Captain Martinez kept in touch with Harold after that flight. They discovered that Harold lived only 2 hours from the captain's home base, and they began meeting regularly for coffee. Harold shared stories about his father that Miguel Martinez had never told his son, filling in pieces of family history that had been lost to time and trauma. Harold lived for 3 more years after that flight, and Captain Martinez spoke at his funeral, telling the assembled crowd about the day a chance encounter on Flight 447 brought together 2 families connected by courage and sacrifice. The story of Harold Thompson and Flight 447 became legend within the airline industry. New flight attendants learned about it during training as an example of how treating every passenger with dignity can reveal extraordinary stories. Captain Martinez was commended by the airline for his compassion and judgment, but perhaps more importantly, the story spread beyond the airline. Passengers who were on that flight shared it with their families, their friends, their co-workers. Jessica started volunteering with veteran organizations in Phoenix, working to ensure that aging veterans received the respect and care they deserved. The businessman, whose name was David Chen, established a scholarship fund for the children of wounded veterans, inspired by Harold's quiet dignity and the captain's recognition of service. The mother used the experience to teach her daughter about respect, sacrifice, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to see the person underneath. Harold's story reminds us that we share our world with heroes who don't wear capes or seek recognition. They sit quietly on airplanes, stand in grocery store lines, and live among us with humility that belies their extraordinary contributions to our freedom and safety. Every day, we encounter people whose stories we don't know, whose struggles we can't see, whose achievements we might never learn about. The elderly person moving slowly ahead of us might be a war veteran. The quiet woman at the coffee shop might be a cancer survivor. The teenager with the unusual behavior might be dealing with invisible challenges that would break many adults. Harold Thompson's journey on Flight 447 teaches us that respect costs nothing but means everything. It shows us that kindness can bridge generations, that recognition of service matters deeply to those who have served, and that sometimes the most profound moments come from the simplest acts of human decency. In a world that often seems divided by differences, Harold's story reminds us of what we share, our common humanity, our capacity for both cruelty and kindness, and our ability to choose which path we'll take when faced with opportunities to lift others up or tear them down. Captain Martinez often says that the best part of his job isn't the flying. It's the people he meets and the stories he becomes part of. Harold Thompson's story became part of his own family's legacy, a reminder that heroism often comes quietly, without fanfare, from ordinary people who do extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. The next time you're tempted to judge someone by their appearance, their age, or their circumstances, remember Harold Thompson. Remember that everyone you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about, carrying burdens you can't see, and possessing strength you might not recognize. Choose kindness. Choose respect. Choose to see the person behind the surface. You never know when you might be sitting next to a hero who changed the world in ways both small and profound. This is the gift of Harold's story, and the lesson of Flight 447, that recognition, respect, and human dignity have the power to transform ordinary moments into extraordinary ones, and that sometimes the greatest flights aren't measured in miles traveled, but in hearts touched and lives changed forever.